Hi, I'm Brooklyn. I'm with Handstitched, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Rosie dress. Now, this pattern is awesome because it's easy, it's designed for beginners, it's quick, and it comes in sizes from newborn through adult sizes. I'm not sure exactly which ones, but anyways, this tutorial will show you how to make it. Now, when you get a kit from Handstitched, it all comes cut out, which eliminates the hardest part of making clothes. And in about 30 minutes, you'll get something like this. Enjoy.
Look at your cute little kit. Okay, when you get this in the mail, it has two parts. There's the pattern and the fabric. So all of these fabric pieces are labeled for exactly what they are. You'll see we have the sleeves, the front bodice, the back bodice, and the skirt pieces. This has the bias tape, the button, and the elastic. And we're going to start by kind of organizing the space and then taking the skirt. So unfold this little guy. You'll see that you have two pieces. And this fabric is simple because there's only one side, but on other fabrics, make sure that you pay attention to the outside. So start by folding the bottom seam in about 1/4 inch, and also never iron on your mat. That was just a naughty thing that I did. Fold it over again by about 1 inch and do this for the whole thing. And then sew a seam along that fold about 1/8 of an inch in. So it's just barely holding everything in place. Next, you'll take your sleeve, and now this is a really funky shape, but you'll see why. So fold over that little tiny edge until it's flush with the other piece, and then fold it over again so that this side seam is even. And of course you'll iron it, and then sew it like you did the skirt. You can see how nice and finished that is. Next, you're going to take the back bodice piece, and this is the seam that goes together. You can tell by this little weird mark that's the keyhole. And once that's sewn together, take the front bodice piece, right sides together, and pin the sides. The notches and the sides will help keep you aligned, so make sure that they match up. And of course, after it's pinned, you need to sew it up with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and just try to keep that as straight as you can. And that sticks your bodice together. Next, you're going to pin the top of the sleeves, and it pulls up a little bit. Just make sure the edges are nice and even, and use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that. Now this is the skirt piece. These are both pieces finished, and they need to be sewn together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you have a little circle. And then we're going to take this and gather the top. Now this is so much easier than it looks. Make a seam in your skirt with as big of a stitch as you can, and then pull one of the threads until you get a little ruffle. Then the next step is just to make sure that that ruffle and the skirt size matches the width of the bodice. Take the bodice, fold it inside out, or right side out, and stick it on the inside of the skirt so that you're working with the inside of the skirt and the right side of the bodice. Then line up the seams, make them nice and pretty, and then pin those in place. Pinning on this is super important because it keeps everything exactly where it should be so that you don't get a bunch of gathers on one side and then a flat skirt on the other. When I'm pinning something like this, I start on the side seams that have to match up, and then I work from the middle out. And that, for me, just keeps it nice and neat. All I'm doing here is just gathering it and making sure all the gathers are even across the whole bodice, and that will help keep the skirt full and looking professional. Once you're ready to sew this, sew beneath the line or the seam that you made for the ruffle, and it's usually about 1/4 inch. Once you turn this right side out, you see you basically have a dress done. All you have to do next is the sleeves and finishing the neckline. So pin the sleeve together with that folded edge on the inside and sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Turn it right side out and stick it inside the dress. So line up these notches that are so helpful and pin those in place. Now when you're sewing the sleeve, it has a curved edge, so sometimes you kind of have to stretch and pull and manipulate this. Just make sure that your seam goes on the inside of the notches, or else you'll get little holes in your sleeve and you don't want that. If you're kind of unfamiliar with sewing, you might not know what I mean by seam allowance, but it just means the distance from the edge of the fabric to where the thread goes. You've done both sleeves. You look at this and it's so beautiful. You did such a good job. And all that's left to do is the bias tape. Now, this can be really intimidating, but it makes the whole dress finish and it feels so good once you do it. And there are so many ways to do this, but I always start with a basting stitch, which means that I just kind of track where I want to go, and it helps me just make sure that everything is nice and even. And then you take your bias tape, and with this dress, I did it kind of backwards in here, but you'll want to start with the keyhole, not the neckline. So I take the inside folded edge of the bias tape and unfold it, and line that up with the basting stitch. And it's important to pin this in place. And when you do start with the bias tape or the keyhole first, you want to leave extra edges just like this. And when you see when it's done, it's even easy to just pin the neckline and then go back and pin the keyhole in place. And you can even just switch the order around. However is comfortable for you. There's really no rules here. When you're pinning this bias tape, sometimes it gets really bunched up on these tight corners. And all you have to do to help fix that is cut a little notch in the bottom. You won't be able to see this when it's done, but it really helps both stretch the bias tape so that it's nice and neat and make it feel more finished when it's done. Once it's all pinned in place, you'll have these little weird tails, but you just sew this by flipping it over so it's facing the inside of the dress, and you should have the edge of the bias tape that is that you can't see the two sides of it. Unless you want to do a double seam around the top, then you kind of sew that inside out, but this is the easiest way to do it. So the next step is hand sewing that little tiny piece of elastic in a loop on the top of the dress that will serve as a buttonhole. This makes it so you can see the button a little bit easier, and it's easier to sew, so we all like that. Make sure it's really secure because this can come undone pretty easily. And the kit usually includes more than what you need, so make this whatever size you think is best. Tie a knot, and next you have to sew the pearl button in place. And of course, if you have a button you like better, put it here and make this dress your own. Customize it, save this button for something else. I always start sewing through the back because 1, it makes it a little less visible, and 2, it hides the knot, which makes it a little bit more secure. So sew around this button a couple times to make it as strong and tough as the kids who will wear this dress. And if you haven't noticed, kids can be pretty hard on clothes. So the tighter you sew this, the more stitches you make, the better it will stand up in the wash. Once you're done sewing the button in place, you are done with the Rosie dress. And this is some of the pictures of my little friends who are wearing their Rosie dress. These fabrics are the Bryony and the natural linen that we always have in stock and in our shop.